The Nostradamus of presidential predictions.
The historian named the Nostradamus of presidential elections.
Nostradamus of presidential elections. Historian Allan Lichtman.
Hello, friends. Today we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart. Forecasting, trying to foretell the future, or as it used to be called, prophecy. So today we're going to talk about Nostradamus versus Nostradamus. Are there really two Nostradamuses? Kind of, but not necessarily. First, Nostradamus was an astrologer and seer from the 1500s, a guy who died nearly 700 years ago, but is still the subject of all kinds of commentary and analysis. The second Nostradamus is a name that people assigned to me. I wasn't really happy about it. I didn't, call myself the Nostradamus, but because of my 40-year successful record of forecasting the outcome of American presidential elections in multiple media outlets, they called me the election Nostradamus. Of course, that took a big hit when I was wrong in forecasting Kamala Harris win in 2024 in an entirely unprecedented election. But still, being wrong once in over 40 years, I don't think is too bad. And maybe it's as good or better than the record of the original, much more famous Nostradamus. I want to talk to you again about accuracy and bias in the media. Ground News is a website and app that I use that pulls articles from all over the world and organizes them by story. With Ground News, you can compare how different outlets cover the same story, complete with context and visual breakdowns of the sources. You'll see details like their political bias, reliability, reporting practices, and ownership, which is critical. These ratings are created through 3 independent news monitoring organizations. For example, take the story, quote, U.S. and Mexico agree to a 1-month pause on tariffs after border security deal, unquote. There are over 600 news sources for this story, with 43% of the bias from the center. It's also great to see that 78% of these sources are rated as highly factual, and 11% of them are from independent sources. Take a look at the bias comparison, which gives you an AI summary for the left, center, and right sources. Examining the headlines further, sources from the right focus on terms such as negotiating tactics, Canada and Mexico cave, and the purge, whereas left headlines focus on terms like acing tariff negotiations, high stakes, and threatened. The blind spot feed highlights news stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. You know how much I care about combating misleading information. Ground News helps you see through misleading narratives and stay informed without being overwhelmed. So go to ground.news/Allan, ALLAN, or scan this QR code to subscribe. My link saves you 40% on their top tier Vantage plan, which I use to access all their features. That's only $5 a month in a world where news moves fast and the truth is hard to find. It's important to be using Ground News to see the full perspective. Plus, by subscribing, you're directly supporting my work. As I said, he was an astrologer and scholar of the 1500s, and he wrote a book with about 940 or so-called prophetic quatrains, that is, 4-line prophecies supposedly forecasting future events. And Nostradamus has become an incredible cottage industry, probably amounting to billions of dollars worth of commerce. There have been hundreds of books and scholarly articles written about Nostradamus and his supposed incredible record of prophecy. Supposedly, Nostradamus predicted the death of kings and queens, including Queen Elizabeth II. Supposedly, he predicted the Great Fire of London. More recently, supposedly, he predicted World War I and World War II, the rise of Hitler, even the 9/11 terrorist attacks. If true, an amazing record. However, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And scholars have reassessed Nostradamus's predictions, many of them arguing that if you look closely at what he said way back then, they're not really predictions. Rather, what he said was so vague and so general that after the fact, it could be applied to virtually any set of events. Let me turn to one scholar who scrutinized Nostradamus. He said, quote, Nostradamus has the virtue of vagueness combined with apocalyptic fervor. Apocalyptic fervor always excites and appeals to people. He went on to say, this critic, quote, that's not unusual. Many sayers of sooth, from Merlin and Geoffrey of Monmouth onwards, have done the same. This vagueness lends itself to what we now know as confirmation bias. That is, after the fact confirmation of something in accord with one's own biases and expectations. The scholar went on to say, in desperate times, soothsayers have a ready audience for their insane nonsense. It is the meeting point of cynicism and gullibility. There's probably no way to make a definitive judgment about Nostradamus. The critics certainly have a really strong point. On the other hand, there does seem to be at least some correlation between the quatrains of Nostradamus and subsequent events. And as the critic points out, people are always looking for some enlightenment about the future and confirmation of their own beliefs and biases. Really beginning in the 20th century, there have begun scientific methods of prediction, not based on astrology or the study of ancient texts, like the predictions of the original Nostradamus. Most famously, of course, is the rise of scientific polling, which took hold for presidential elections for the first time in the 1930s, when scientific pollsters led by the original George Gallup correctly predicted Franklin Roosevelt's victory in 1936. But there are criticisms of polling, just as there are criticisms of Nostradamus, that most polls, except in landslide elections like 1936, don't tell you anything because the margin of error is too large. They tell you the margin of error is plus and minus 3%, but that's pure statistical error. When you add on all other sources of error, such as not knowing who's actually voting, it's really at least double that. Plus, the pollsters have often been egregiously wrong. For example, predicting Harry Truman's defeat in 1948 or predicting Donald Trump's defeat in 2016. I developed my own model as an alternative to astrological interpretations and to the polls, which are not only inaccurate often, but don't tell you anything. There's no meaning to them. I developed a unique idea that we can base our forecasting scientifically on history. And I teamed up back in 1981 with the world's leading authority in earthquake prediction, Vladimir Kailas Borak. And we used the methodology of earthquake prediction, of pattern recognition, to look at every American presidential election from 1860, the horse and buggy days of politics, when Abe Lincoln was elected to 1980 when Reagan was elected. This was 1981, and this led to the 13 keys to the White House, simple yes/no questions which determine whether or not the party holding the White House has governed well enough to get another 4 years in office. And this methodology, frankly, was successful far beyond I even had anticipated. Been successful since my first prediction in 1982 of Ronald Reagan's reelection, when 60% of Americans said he was too old to run again and his polls are in the dumps, and it worked through 2020. But I was very careful in saying that, I'm not Nostradamus who looks at the stars. I'm not psychic Gene Dixon with a crystal ball. I'm not Speaker Mike Johnson who thinks the Almighty talks to him. My system is based on history, and the patterns of history can change. And we did have very much of an unprecedented election in 2024. We have never before seen a political party, in this case, the Democrats, openly, right out in public, trashing their elected president and their elected nominee, and then pushing them out right before the convention. We've never before seen the enormous degree of disinformation, coming to a great extent from Elon Musk, who owns X and spent hundreds of millions of dollars spreading disinformation. This is a new era of American politics, and it is an open question whether forecasting models based on past history will continue to work. So don't call me Nostradamus, but call me a very serious scholar who developed a very important understanding of American presidential elections as essentially votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And we have a lot of time, and I hope all you listeners will help me to test and modify the keys over the next 4 years to see whether they still apply in this new era or whether they need to be some kind of tweaking or changing. Something, of course, that the original and one and only Nostradamus never did. Thank you.